Friday, right?
It is. Yeah, David, it would not be a Friday if there was not news about your Dallas Cowboys in the back and forth. Will this ever end? I'm asking you. Do you have any information?
I really don't know. The news today, a federal court in New York temporarily blocking a lower court's ruling which would have allowed Elliott's 6-game suspension to begin this week. It's the third time Elliott has delayed this suspension for domestic violence allegations. Elliott will play for the Cowboys against the Chiefs on Sunday. This has become the legal version of an extended rally in tennis. Back and forth they go. Elliott, remember, won a preliminary injunction on September 8th, but an appeals court cleared the way for the NFL to impose the suspension on October 12th. Elliott was then granted another legal reprieve on October 17th before losing a request for a preliminary injunction on Monday. And then this morning, he was granted a temporary administrative stay. We bring in our ESPN legal analyst, Ryan Smith, who has been summoned once again to try and explain this back and forth case. If I get this correct, it sounds like this ruling, a bit of a placeholder, kick the can down the road for a week or so.
Yep.
What happens next?
So what happens is he's seeking an injunction, and he's also seeking an expedited hearing in front of a 3-judge panel, the appellate court, to basically try to overturn what that district court did. The district court saying the suspension is back on. So this essentially pushes it to next week, pushes that motion for an injunction and also that request for that expedited hearing to this 3-judge panel. They'll hear this case, but now the timing becomes interesting because, yes, he plays this weekend, but the question becomes, what does this appellate court do next week? Do they agree to have this hearing? Do they actually hear the case, then make a ruling next week? That's a very fast time frame for them. Do they actually extend this stay for some period of time? It remains to be seen. So for now, he plays, and this gets moved to this 3-judge panel.
Okay, so the timetable is important. Also at question is this sort of the last straw in this case? Are we going to know one way or another when this 3-judge panel rules whether he will continue to finish out the 2017 season or he will be suspended this year?
Well, if he wins, he stands a very good chance of playing the rest of the season. If he loses, it's up to him. Because at that point, you could make the argument, well, he's lost in the appellate court. Now, does he try to go to the Supreme Court? Does he try to ask the Supreme Court justice responsible for that particular jurisdiction to, hey, Supreme Court, while you're deciding on whether to hear this case, let me play again, another type of stay. That could all happen if he loses, but then it's all going to depend on him. What does he want to do and how far does he want to take this? The odds are still in the NFL's favor because the precedent is on their side. But he brings up really good arguments. Like, for example, on this past thing in the district court, you had the judge granting the TRO against the NFL, and then you had the judge who actually put the suspension back in place, who said he doesn't really have that great of a case. So there's some interesting issues here to decide, and I think he's just trying to make the move of what keeps me on the field at this point. You can't blame him.
He's got at least one more week. The Cowboys will play the Chiefs on Sunday. Ryan Smith, I'm sure we will be talking to you once again, Ryan, as this case continues. Carrie?
All right, David, thank you for that update. So we just heard Ryan Smith talk about the back and forth. Joining us now is Stephen A. Smith of First Take. Thank you for joining us. I want to talk about the bigger picture here, Stephen A. Maybe you can put this in perspective for us. I'm not talking about the NFLPA, but what is this really about? It seems to be the league against a franchise. Can you talk to us about what we're really looking at here?
Well, I think it's the league just trying to flex its muscle and making sure that their power doesn't get compromised. It's a power bestowed upon them by the owners and by the Players Association. Collectively bargained that Roger Goodell would have this power, and Roger Goodell and the league is not going to relinquish that power. It's a bit divisive from the perspective that usually he has the unwavering support of ownership, but with a couple of cases as of late, obviously that has not been the case. Usually the owners bestow this power upon a commissioner because they don't want to be the ones to be the bad guy. That's why you give the league office and the commissioner the power to do what he does so they can say it's out of our hands. Because could you imagine if Jerry Jones was deciding or another owner was deciding to suspend a player for an indefinite period of time? How are you then going to go around in the offseason, recruit guys to come and play for your franchise and free agency and beyond? So they always want somebody to be the bad guy. The problem is the very power that they bestowed upon Roger Goodell, he's exercising it and using it to his advantage. He ticked off Robert Kraft years ago with Tom Brady and Deflategate prior to last season. And then obviously this year it's with Ezekiel Elliott. And so you're hearing a lot of noise in that regard. But it comes down to the fact that the power was bestowed upon him. The league owners wanted the commissioner to have this power. The Players Association clearly did not, but they collectively bargained against it and they lost that battle. So Roger Goodell is going to make sure that for come hell or high water, he's able to hold on to that power, and they're not going to let any player or any one individual franchise compromise the overall power of the commissioner, because his job is to protect the league, and in the owner's eyes, that means protecting them as a collective body as opposed to one or two individual owners.
Okay, so one or two individual owners. You mentioned Robert Kraft. I was going to go there. How do you see this actually ending in terms of for the NFL commissioner and perhaps a new CBA, a new ruling that allows owners to object to the commissioner?
Well, once upon a time, I would have told you it's going to end up with the player being suspended, and it would end there. Just like Tom Brady got suspended for 4 games for deflated football. Don't think for 1 second that Ezekiel Elliott is going to serve less than 6 games for what the league has determined is more plausible than not that he was involved in domestic violence and in instigating domestic violence, if you read their report. But it may not stop there with this particular case, Kerry, for this reason. If you're losing money, you're losing ratings, you're losing revenue, and you got Papa John's Pizza, who Jerry Jones is in business with, by the way, coming out and stating that their bottom line has been compromised because of these protests. Anytime you're in a situation where you're the commissioner and the bottom line isn't being addressed in a positive way, now your job could be in jeopardy, because that's something that they're not going to tolerate. Before, whether it be Ray Rice, Ray McDonald, Greg Hardy, whomever, no big deal in the eyes of the league office in terms of business, because they were still making money. $14 billion this year, $18 billion projected by the year 2027, according to Roger Goodell. It was going to be $25 billion. But now that that's in jeopardy of being compromised, if they're able as a collective body of owners to look at Roger Goodell and determine that he's somebody that's contributed to that demise, they may hold him accountable. So you don't know in that regard.
All right, lastly, let's go back to the face of the fight. Do you really think that Zeke Elliott wants to continue on with this?
I think so. Because he wants to play football. But I also think he's being led astray. And here's why. I've been on the record stating this on many occasions, Kerry, and I'll continue with it. This is not an issue about deflated footballs. This is an issue about domestic violence. Now, while I agree that the NFL has no business being in the business of trying to determine his guilt or innocence like they're a law enforcement official or somebody like that, in the end, what this comes down to is that the longer this fight continues on, the longer Ezekiel Elliott remains in the news for domestic violence. My proposal months ago was that Ezekiel Elliott stand on a podium in front of everybody, and if he's innocent, emphatically proclaim his innocence. He did not do this. However, it's the NFL we're talking about here, not law enforcement. The commissioner has this power. There's nothing I can do about it. So let me serve my 6 games and get it over with. But by continuing to fight it, he remains in the news for domestic violence. And you don't win when that's your situation if you're Ezekiel Elliott, because every time we're talking about you, we're talking about this case, not just you playing football, which means that you're in the news for the wrong reasons. And that's never good for a young athlete in this day and age.
All right. Meanwhile, you can hear Stephen A. on ESPN Radio today at 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, we're talking about Zeke Elliott, his head coach earlier today, Jason Garrett.
He came back in this morning, and I had a brief meeting with him. He went into the offensive meeting and was just involved in the walkthrough. We anticipate him practicing today and playing in the game on Sunday. We control what we control. Zeke controls what he can control, and you go to work. I thought we had 2 good practice days on Wednesday and Thursday. Obviously, the other running backs got that work, but Zeke's a smart guy. He's played a lot of football for us in a short period of time, so he'll practice today, and we'll catch him up as we go here the next 48 hours and anticipate him playing in this ball game.
Elliott's first day back at the Star there today. We bring in Teddy Bruschi and Dan Graziano. Hasn't practiced all week, probably not a big concern for a running back. The guy's a game changer, Teddy. How does he change this game against this Chiefs team?
Oh, well, compared to other running backs that they have, whether it be Morris McFadden or whoever's playing in that game, you're talking about a 4-yard gain by lesser players, or an 8-yard gain, 12-yard gain by Ezekiel Elliott. That's how hard of a tackle he is. So that's a huge difference when you have a 2nd and 2 rather than a 2nd and 8. So that, to me, that's the evidence right there of his greatness, of how good he plays at the running back position, is that tangible number. What's our down and distance when we give it to him? How much does he gain? How many yards after contact? How much more energized is our offensive line when he's behind them? All of that comes into effect because he truly is a special player.
Just to put the numbers on that, only running back in the league that has more yards this year on first downs than Ezekiel Elliott is Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. On average, he gains 4.29 yards on first down. So do the math. They're in a 2nd and 5, 2nd and 6 every time, right? Yeah. And then that affects your play calling. Talking to people with the Cowboys this week, they're saying, Alfred Morris gets 4 or 5 yards on first down, then we'll run the same exact game plan. But if he only gets 2 or 3, then we're going to have to change some things. So they count on that from Ezekiel Elliott.
Kansas City not particularly good against the run, either 29th in the NFL in that category. Dan, the league is having a heck of a time, a heck of a legal fight trying to get this suspension to stick. What is their response? What do they feel now about this latest decision?
I think they're frustrated. I mean, talking to people at the league, I think, there's some sense that if he had just accepted the suspension at the beginning, he'd have been done with it by now and already played a couple of games. Now, obviously, on Elliott's side, you're being accused of something that you say you didn't do, and is a despicable thing to be accused of. If you didn't, you would fight it until you had no more options left. So that's his point of view, and I understand that, obviously. But from the league's point of view, I think they feel like they're going to prevail ultimately. And I think, whether that means a similar situation to what we saw with Tom Brady a couple of years ago when the suspension was stayed and then the case was heard in the offseason and then the suspension went into effect the following season. I think there's a sense that that's the most likely outcome. But the league does want to preserve its right to administer its discipline as it sees fit and not have it, finagled with by a player or a court system. And so that's why they're fighting this fight.
I'm not up on legal situations or anything like that, but as a teammate, you've got to think, well, if the league fights back in battles, could you be missing games in late December?
You could, and playoff.
Could you be missing playoff games? You got to think that as a teammate.
Interesting you bring that up. The letter to Ezekiel Elliott, Dan and I were just reading, it says 6 regular season games.
Okay. But the league is taking the position that that's not that suspensions carry over into the postseason and Super Bowl. So that's a fight that could still be fought if it